Welcome everyone to another episode of Keys to Home Buying. Today we're going to be going over contingencies in the purchase and sale agreement. We're going to be going through each one of them. I got the list up of the kind of the boilerplate contingencies, and we're going to break down what each of them is and how they can be utilized. So first off, every purchase and sale agreement typically has these contingencies by default built in, and you just check off yes or no of whether or not you're actually going to include that in the agreement, the signed agreement. So what a contingency is, high level, is if it's checked off yes, that contingency is part of the contract, then that item has to be accounted for by a certain date. Otherwise, the purchaser or seller can terminate and walk away without any penalty. Most of these are in favor of the buyer as a way that they can back out of the contract and still get their earnest money back. So the earnest money is money that you give up front with your offer to kind of show you're serious, put a little skin in the game, and it's held onto by the seller. If you back out for a reason other than a contingency, they get to keep that money and they relist the house for someone else to buy it. So these are really important, good to understand. And when you're going through the process of submitting an offer with your realtor, be sure to go through these with them and ask their opinion of which ones should be included and which should not. It's going to depend a lot on competitiveness. So if there are a bunch of other offers already on the property, sometimes people will waive contingencies. Back in early 2022, when there were up to 30 offers at a time on a single property that's been listed for 2 days, we saw all the time all sorts of contingencies being waived just to make their offer more competitive. These days, today is February 9th, 2023. We're back to kind of the way things used to be where most of the contingencies were in play. So let's go through these one at a time and see what it's all about. So I have the list in front of me. I'm just going to go down. I'll let you know which ones I care about the most personally as a mortgage loan officer, but all of these essentially are important. So first one is personal property. This one's pretty straightforward, and I've never seen a contract terminate because of this one. But this is, for example, in this contract, the buyers, want the window blinds, ring sensors, the fridge, washer, dryer, dishwasher, gas range, electronic garage door openers, and permanent lighting fixtures to be included in the sale. So, for example, if the sellers took those lighting fixtures before closing, is it really going to blow up the deal? Probably not, but they probably have to give some kind of concession in return. It's part of the contract. But either way, because this is in here, if the seller decided not to provide those items, the buyer could back out and get their deposit back. So this is personal property. This is anything that you as the buyer, if you like the house and you like certain things in it, you can request like, hey, I want that part of the sale. You do have to do it somewhat within reason. Again, ask your realtor their opinion. If somebody's like a super old vintage car collector and you see one in the garage and you want that included, technically that can be included in this part of the contingency agreement. But if they're a vintage car collector, they probably don't want to part with that. So maybe not worth asking for it. Who knows? Ask your realtor. So that's the personal property contingency. It's very common that this is included, and most of the time it is for appliances like the fridge and the stove. The next one is the appraisal contingency. This is one that I'm often looking at, and this is one that was commonly waived back in early 2022. Again, we're starting to see it included again, which I think is really good. So this one just makes sure the appraisal comes in at or above the purchase price. So when we order the appraisal, we, the mortgage company, order it on behalf of the buyer. And that appraisal, when it comes in, is going to tell us what the home is actually worth. So if in your purchase and sale agreement, you agreed to buy the home for $100,000, but then the appraisal came in at $90,000, you have three options at that point. Option one is you pay that $10,000 difference. Everyone moves on with their lives. You get the house for $100,000, even though it's only worth $90,000. Option two, you go back to the seller, provide them a copy of the appraisal and say, hey, this is actually only worth 90. We agreed on 100. Can we draft up an addendum to lower the purchase price to 90? So I'm buying it for what it's worth. If the seller agrees, great. You sign some paperwork, move forward and close on the house for 90,000. Option three is you back out of the contract entirely and use this contingency to get your deposit back, because this contingency is that the appraisal meets or exceeds the value of the purchase price. So this one is pretty critical, at least in our world. And again, these days is included most of the time. The next one, contingent sale. This is if you are a current homeowner and you're planning on selling your home in order to buy the new home. So there's a few different scenarios with this one. The first one that's most straightforward is you own a home, you go under contract to purchase a new home, but you let the sellers know that we have to sell this home that we're currently in before we can close on purchasing yours. If the seller agrees, great. That's where this contingent sale contingency comes into play. There usually is some kind of deadline of, okay, you have to have your home at least under contract by a certain date. That'll be noted in the contingency. And if you can't sell it or can't get it under contract by that date, then you back out and the contract is terminated. Or you can update the contingency with an addendum and say, hey, we're going to extend it another couple weeks or whatever period of time you and the seller agree on. So this one, again, was very commonly waived in 2022. Now it's kind of coming back. In my opinion, all of these contingencies are mostly to protect the buyer. So I'm in favor of all of them, with the buyer always being my client. But it really just depends on the situation and your position as a buyer as to whether or not it's actually a good idea to include these, or if you should waive some to get a little bit of an edge. So that's the contingent sale contingency. And I apologize if I'm stuffy. I am coming down from COVID. So hopefully you can bear with me through the rest of this. The next one, boundaries. I don't hear a lot about this one, honestly, but this is just a contingency where, let's say you have a property with a ton of acres and you're selling it, and the buyer wants you to walk the land with them and show them where the boundaries are. That's what this contingency is okay, at some point you need to walk the property line with me and show me every piece of it, where my border is. That too has a date associated. Okay, you have to walk the land with me within this time frame, otherwise you can back out. This one, for example, does not have that contingency. It's checked off as no, so we don't really need to worry about it. Let's see, the next one, seller property information report, often referred to as the SPUR. This is just saying that they have to receive a copy of the SPUR. As a lender, I really don't look at that very much, but it's a very detailed document explaining a lot of information about the property that the listing doesn't have, right? So the public listing that is on the MLS that you look at on Zillow and all that won't have as much detail as the SPUR will. So this one is just saying you have to provide a copy. Kind of odd to have this as a contingency. I can never imagine somebody backing out because of this, unless there was something on the SPUR that says like, oh yeah, a quarter of the foundation broke off, but it's not visible and the inspector didn't catch it. Now you have the SPUR and it says that, and okay, well now I don't want to buy this anymore. Maybe this contingency could help you get out. This one in particular, that's not one of the contingencies. I don't hear about this one very often either, but it is one of the boilerplate ones included in contracts that is an option to include on your offer. Seller contribution is the next one. This one I very much look at, because seller contributions we have to account for on the lending side, so we know how much cash you have to bring to the closing table. So seller contributions or seller concessions or seller credits, they're all kind of the same term for the same thing, different terms for the same thing. Basically, that's the seller paying towards your closing costs and prepaids. So each loan program has a limit to how much they can contribute based on loan and down payment. In this case, they are getting a 6% concession from the seller. So we're going to use that to cover the buyer's closing costs. If there's any excess, we're going to apply it to lower their interest rate. So seller credits are pretty great, and they are a contingency, not in the sense that the buyer can just back out, which I guess they could, but I've never heard of a seller signing an agreement that says there's a seller credit and then all of a sudden changing their mind down the road. I've never heard of that, but technically I guess that could happen, and that's why it's a contingency, because if that did happen, well, now the buyer has reason to back out because they were promised that money. Now they're not going to get it, so they should back out and get their deposit back. Let's see. Next page is a suitable housing condition. So this one is kind of the opposite of the contingent sale contingency, right? So the one earlier said that the buyers who own a house need to get their current one under contract before closing on the new one. This one is for the sellers to say, okay, I'm selling this house to you, Mr. Buyer. I need to go find my next house before we sell it to you. So it's the seller's version of the contingent sale. This one too, there's usually a time frame, like, okay, we have 2 months to find suitable housing for ourselves before we sell you this house, and that time frame is determined between you and the sellers. Uh, in this case, it's not part of it, so we're not going to worry about it. But when it does come up, that's something I do keep an eye on, and I will check in with the realtors as time goes on, just to say, hey, how's it looking? Just to give us an idea of, is this actually going to go through or not, right? Because if the seller's having a really hard time finding in the next house, maybe this sale won't actually happen. But it is a contingency. It allows the seller to back out in that case. So this one's more for the seller. Next one, release/kickout. I really don't know much about this one. Okay. So this one is, let's say, the purchaser does have a contingent sale agreement, right? So you as the buyer, you own a house, you're under contract to buy the seller's house, but you need to sell yours first. So you have a contingent sale agreement. The seller, because you have a contingent sale agreement, can decide to include this release/kickout contingency, which says, okay, because you're still working on selling your house, we're going to keep your offer intact, but we're also going to continue to list this property. And if by chance someone else comes along and wants to buy it, who's ready to go right now, then we can go with their offer instead of yours. And there is a window of, okay, they have to give you some kind of notice if that happens. So seller accepts the buyer's offer, contract is drafted, the release kickout contingency is in there. 2 days later, someone else comes along. The seller wants to accept that offer. They go back to the original buyers and say, hey, I'm ready to accept these guys' offer. Where are you at with selling your house? If the buyers are like, oh yeah, we just went under contract, great, this one goes forward. Otherwise, the sellers have the right to terminate and go with that new offer instead. And the timing is all based on whatever this contingency says for however many days until they can no longer utilize this contingency. So again, if this one is included, be sure to kind of be on top of it. Check with your realtor on what they think for a timeline. And this one could certainly come back to bite you if you are the buyer and you have a contingent sale contingency. In this case, they're not doing that, so we don't have to worry about it. But again, that's something I would keep an eye on as well as the lender, because that does pose risk that this might not actually go through. They might go with somebody else. All right, we got two more. Attorney review is the next one. This one I don't see a lot actually utilized, but this one's basically saying, the buyers and sellers have rights to send the contract to attorneys for review before really moving forward. I think it's not typically included because almost every contract that I get is the same exact language. Realtors kind of use the same templated purchase and sale agreement across the board. Usually when this contingency is included is if there are some really strange tweaks or maybe some custom contingencies added to the contract, then maybe you'd want an attorney to actually review that because the language isn't common. Or if it was let's say it's a for sale by owner and there's no realtors on the transaction at all, then this contingency is almost always in there because the attorneys are actually drafting the contracts and they want to review each other's work. So this one I don't see very often. It's not on this one here. And in general, I am all for using realtors. I don't know why you wouldn't. It's their job. Why waste your time on doing all this stuff when someone could do it for you? You probably end up wasting more of your own money by doing this yourself. So the last one here is the prebate. This one confuses the heck out of a lot of people, and this one I absolutely look at. So the prebate has to do with homestead declaration. So, excuse me. When you own a home in Vermont, if you own it by April 1st of that tax year, then the state will look at your household income. And if you're below a certain threshold based on what town you live in, you could be owed a discount on your taxes, which is commonly referred to as a prebate. And that discount is applied to your tax bill So back in the day, they used to mail people checks in hopes that they would save it and use that to pay their tax bill, but people would just take the money and just start spending it. And then the town started noticing that their tax bills weren't being paid in full. So then they just decided that, okay, the state's just going to send the money to the town clerk instead to pay a portion of the tax bill as a discount. So this prebate contingency, first of all, I'm going to say talk to your attorney on how to calculate it, because I don't even know how. It confuses the heck out of me. But basically, as a seller, if you have a prebate, so if you have a discount on your taxes, the purchaser of your home is on the hook for paying out the remainder of that discount that you have not already received. So say your discount was $200 and you have 2 tax installments throughout the year, then each installment has $100 of discount. If you paid one of the tax bills, you're still owed the $100 discount on the other one. I could be misexplaining that. Again, reach out to a real estate attorney to get the real scoop on that. In fact, I'm going to be bringing an attorney onto the show to interview sometime coming up here, and this is something we'll certainly pick their brain about. But essentially, on my end, I need to know about this, because if the buyer is on the hook for paying that and there is a discount, I want to prepare them, say, okay, here's your closing costs and here's your down payment. On top of that, you do owe this prebate amount as well. Call your attorney to see exactly what that amount is. So this one's definitely pretty crucial to keep an eye on. And as a buyer, make sure you know if it's included or not, and talk to your attorney about how much it's going to be, because it is more money you're going to have to bring to the closing table. Now, if your realtor is able to negotiate that it's negotiated in your favor, that means that even if there is a discount on that seller's taxes, if there is a prebate, because it's agreed in this contingency to be in your favor, you don't have to pay it. So if your realtor can pull that off, that's the best scenario for you as the buyer, because then you don't have to pay that amount. So those are the boilerplate kind of pre-canned contingencies that come in every contract that I see that's at least generated with realtors involved. Not all of them are always included. I pointed out the ones that I really would look at, and those are the ones that typically were waived back in 2022 that are now coming back and being included almost every time. So hopefully that helps explain this part of the process. The contingencies trip people up all the time. I do have to go over it with people once they are under contract, just to explain. Like they often don't even know where their deposit's going. So just to touch on that real quick, that earnest money deposit, it's the money you're giving up front with your offer. That money sits in escrow with the seller, and at closing, it gets applied to whatever you need to bring for down payment and closing costs. So if you gave a $5,000 deposit and your initial cash to close was $10,000, well, now you only need to bring $5,000 because you already prepaid $5,000 with your deposit. So having these contingencies in there and clearly understood, you know the stakes of that $5,000 deposit, of whether or not you can get it back. So hopefully this is super helpful. If you guys have other topics you want to hear more about, please let me know. If you're a pro in the industry and you want to be interviewed, reach out. I'd love to have you. I hope you all have a great day. Bye-bye.